during college. Brian ends up at the top end of the country, University of Washington, studying architecture. David is at the other end in New Hampshire at Dartmouth, studying history and studio art. And then they collide at Harvard, in Preston Scott Cohen's studio, I understand. And they got to know each other there, and then got tricked, coaxed, I don't know, somehow ended up in Mac and Merrill's office here in Atlanta. It spent several years there doing a lot of projects, and then spun off and formed Buildings in 2006. And since then, they've really kind of emerged as one of the top design firms in Atlanta. They've built an impressive list of clients, ranging from Steelcase, Jamestown Properties, the Woodruff Arts Center, Georgia Tech. It's a very impressive list of institutional clients, and they've done a lot of great work. They've also received some very impressive awards and acknowledgments over the last few years, including in 2016, the Atlanta AIA Silver Firm. It's an award for basically the top firm award in Atlanta. Very impressive award. And then in 2017, they won the Emerging Voices Award from the Architectural League in New York. And that award is really significant. That started, I think, in 1982, that award, and it really has emerged as one of the most prestigious awards for up-and-coming firms. And past winners include people like Stephen Hall, Todd Williams, actually Mac and Merrill won at one point, Whitesman Peretti, who's giving a lecture in 2 weeks. So it's an impressive list of people who have won that award, and Brian and David won that in 2017. And you also know their projects on campus. The Cadell Building, I think, is one of the most desirable new spaces on campus. It's really, that flex space has become really an amazing space. It works great, and it's a very, very sophisticated kind of intervention, that building. And then you might also know that the circular building that's right next to the architecture building, they're also working on that project. That's a new makerspace, and it's well under construction, and that should be online soon too, and I'm sure that'll also be a very well received and very well used space on campus. So I could go on, but it's just great to have David and Brian here at the school. They're amazing critics. They've been super helpful since I've been here, as we've kind of done some new initiatives in the school, and so it is also great to have you as the Atlanta Practices Lecturer. So please join me in welcoming David and Brian.
So thank you, Scott. It's also great to be here, Scott, under Julie's leadership. It's been really great these last few years. I just wanted to thank you for letting us continue to be involved as we are. And it's also fun for us to share with our peers and kind of our group what we've been doing lately. That's what the spirit of this lecture is. This is not a comprehensive lecture of everything we've ever done. This is new stuff. Before we do anything, I just want some people to stand. Okay, because I think this is important. Scott and Wayland and Patricia and Jason and Matt, please stand. I know this seems, these folks, and am I missing anybody? No, because we're an exceptionally small office. These folks have been over here and are currently over here, our office. This is it. This is the group that has done recently all the work that you're going to see. And it's critical that we all work together. So thank you guys, and I wanted you to make sure. Okay. So some statistics here, because it's always good to start with stats. We started Buildings in January 2006, a little over 12 years. In those last 12 years, we've been an office of 2 people at the fewest. That's probably the majority of the time, but now we're up to 5. So we're huge. Here's what's funny. We calculated today that we started a total of 84 projects over this period. Of those, only 14 have been completed. That happens. and 70 have not. And 7 are in the process in one way or another right now. But of those that have been completed to date, exactly 1 has been a ground-up project. A project where, theoretically, you would think we could establish our own unique responses to the architectural problem, independent of other buildings existing or proposed. 1 house in the old Fourth Ward neighborhood of this city. The remaining projects, all of them, have been in some shape or form adaptations, additions, interventions, problems to messy, complicated, and at times undecipherable architectural situations. So what has value to keep and what doesn't? What has the potential for entering a discourse with something new? How long will the project last? What is the value of something new anyway? These are the problems we've been struggling with over the past 12 years. And the fundamental question is, how have we thought about and practiced in architecture without its own independent origins? So when we last shared our work here at Georgia Tech 4 years ago, we oriented the work around constraints that were informing each project, where we were struggling with everything that was kind of bearing down on what we could do. We're moving past that. We're over it. We're so over it. And today, we are showing primarily work completed since that time, around 4 central themes that you see here: transforms, boundaries, vectors, and rooms. Just ways to think about the projects.
So transforms. When we think of this word and talk about this word, we consider it a noun. And it's an object that reflects the process of its own making from one thing into another. Elements of both old and new are present in various ways simultaneously, but the degree of transformation is purposeful and needs to be physically legible. It might help to consider an analogy with art. In this case, Marcel Duchamp's fountain from 1917. One of his most famous found objects are ready-mades. The urinal was placed in a gallery, it was signed and titled, importantly, Fountain. And as an existing object where the act of the artist has been to discover its beauty and recontextualize it within the museum. Importantly, he signs the work to offer one visual transformation and then titles it in such a way as to confuse its original use. Analogous to that, this building by Fondazione Prada in Milan is arguably an architectural version of that type of transformation. Instead of being brought into the museum is brought to it via its surfacing, monolithic surfacing and gold leaf, creating one transformation within an otherwise untouched, unblemished building, historic building. There is no other apparent physical transformation, just the radical recontextualization of the building that fundamentally changes its idea. And the new idea is the architect's signature. It is OMA as the new author. So as opposed to that, we're going to talk initially about 2 of our projects in terms of this type of approach by Rauschenberg with his piece Monogram, where like Duchamp's ready-made, it's a series of found objects that are placed together in some kind of meaningful or at least purposeful way, but these objects are radically changed by their proximity to each other. They are brought together and then painted over as if they're brought into the realm of a painting. In fact, this is considered a painting. So it changes its nature within a museum of what a painting might be. It's a former auto body shop that the congregation had purchased when they first came to us. It's a simple steel frame clad with tilt-up concrete panels. But that steel frame on the inside creates a wonderful volume and a 70-foot clear span between columns that was perfect, almost perfect for a sanctuary space. And in terms of how we were fortunate about how we could transform this building, because the synagogue didn't need the entire square footage. And we were able to place a large courtyard right on the entry corner. And by carving away the cladding, but leaving the skeleton, we also were able to introduce a new piece of roof that confused the old with the new and appears to slide off that structure and create an opening for the courtyard. This element's in tenuous, there's a tension between its placement and that old structure, which we think helps both. And it also allowed for the bringing the presence of nature into that courtyard space from the surrounding trees. This is as you're entering. And then that courtyard looking back into the social hall space. So this outside, through this excavation, the outside space is allowed to then be brought into the social hall. Here you can see the free span girders that are still doing their work while the space is used kind of independently of that structural system below. And then moving into the sanctuary, those girders are covered but by the ceiling structure. But you can see in the corner column appears, and this happens on either side of the sanctuary. That column is a trace of that structure. But in this case, we've denied its kind of visual, the top part of it, the way it holds itself up. But its presence is really important to kind of keep in mind the new use relative to that old use. So another transform is with the Cadell Building. So you should all be familiar, hopefully most of you will be familiar with this project for the School of Building Construction. And this is a view before, a before shot. Many of you on campus for the last few years won't recognize that building. But it was a remnant building from the 1950s, and as the campus grew up around it, it was surrounded by behemoth buildings that overscaled and didn't make a meaningful role for that building any longer. And part of our project was to create a role for this within that new context, and especially as kind of the fourth side to the quad in front of it. But as we were exploring the structural basis of that project, to find out what the potential really was, it had an enormous structure, huge 3-foot deep steel beams, and what to us appeared to be a concrete frame. And we were investigating that relationship, and what we discovered was a composite structure of concrete and steel together that gave it an enormous capacity, way beyond the size and the use that it was currently being used for. So the strategy, part of the design was then how do we take advantage of that built-in extra capacity? And these sets of diagrams show kind of stripping the existing use partitions out, revealing that frame structure, going back with a new interior set of partitions and organization, cladding that frame in a way that leaves parts of it exposed and through the glass leaves other parts exposed. And then surcharging this with a canopy, a large structure that would provide shade for the glass and allow it to perform environmentally, but also would provide something larger, provide something back to the campus. And that shade structure is organized around different sun angles at different times of years to maximize its benefit to the building. And then below that structure, suspending aluminum louvers. And this allows the building to operate both for itself, but also beyond its own boundaries for the campus. And here. Hopefully some of you have walked under there and seen it performing this way. The interior, likewise, a tremendous transformation. This is before shots. And then from a similar vantage, the current condition in the primary lobby. But we're simply carving openings, allowing the steel, that's a 3-foot beam, existing beam, to be expressed and hang off the columns. And then as moving up, you see the expression of the structure becomes paramount. It drives everything from how we're handling air handling and mechanical systems, electrical, etc. And these are the views back out to the outside. And the transparency of the glass is allowed because of this solar shade. So something happened when we were designing this shade that we were realizing that was unexpected to us. And we were really thrilled by it. And I just want to share the kind of that discovery and how it's ended up in the final building. Here you can see the light coming through that shade structure and hitting shade and shadow on the pavement. But if you look up, you'll see that at times you can see through gaps in the louvers, and other times it's an opaque surface. You cannot see the sky through it, but it's not a dark surface. So it's completely in shade, but it's not a dark surface. And what's happening is that the sun hits it and is reflected. It's not coming through, but there are times when the sun does come through, and then it's also dispersed and diffused, and it reflects and it lights the underside surface of the adjacent baffle. And then there are these moments when the light doesn't get directly through, but it still lights the underside of that baffle. So we are seeing that lit surface. And we're seeing that here we're not seeing shadow, but we're seeing the absence of the reflection, the absence of the reflected light. So this allows this canopy in the shade to be, at certain times, a very bright, almost light source for second-hand light.
The next group of projects we've clustered around the idea of boundaries. Given who we are and when we came up in this discipline, we are unfailing believers in architecture as a critical act. This may sound strange to some folks in the room, but why struggle with what could come easily, right? Go find a client with some funding and design something that's beautiful. Render it. Great. But for us, we have a core belief that an ideal project is one which asks as many questions as it provides answers. It unfailingly does what needs to be done in all technical aspects. That's paramount. It's our primary job. But it also gives us a chance, and others who are with us on this journey, a chance to wonder why. Both of these objectives we desire without compromise and both with integrity. Raising questions is essential. When we talk about boundaries, we are asking ourselves why they exist and can they be crossed. We ask ourselves if they can be complicated or multiplied or perforated or questioned or removed. A project with the right kind of boundaries lets us, for the moment and the duration, fail to completely understand. It's ideally perplexing, even uncanny. And it puts you in context, and it situates you. So in 2008, we were approached by the Atlanta Contemporary Arts Center to participate in a show entitled Mergers and Acquisitions. It's a great show. It's nothing to do with finance. But the museum would take on a loan of significant works by private collectors, and then they asked artists, and in our case architects, to respond in kind with a new work in a temporary installation. So we were asked to respond to this. It's a piece by Gordon Matta Clark entitled Bingo Ninths, 1974. And it's documenting the removal of portions of a house in Love Canal, New York, just prior to its demolition. Literally hours before it was demolished, this picture was taken. So Gordon Matta Clark, we all know, is beloved by architects, and you can imagine we had extreme trepidation in trying to respond to this. So we did our best. We located a corner of a storage room at the edge of the gallery, and we decided to investigate. And what we're going to show you is a time lapse over our work over a period of 5 days. and this is with ourselves and a few other folks. And as you do when you're of a certain age, you do all the work yourself. So that's what we did. So the first task was to remove the intervening wall and exposing an acute angle in the gallery. And then we made an inscription along that wall in the exact elevation of the exterior, on the opposite side of the wall, revealing not only the framing, but the multiple layers of paint and debris and moisture. Then what we did is we came back and we restructured the wall to allow for its suspension and to allow for the removal of the intervening studs. It's a little bit of magic here. So we're peeling back the studs, but the wall is staying there. And then we found an old window. We started dismantling it. And then suddenly the daylight flooded the gallery. This work was intensive, and we were a group of 4 people, and the nights were obviously long, but that's all right. Every now and then we stopped and we had a beer, we enjoyed each other. There we are having a beer. And once the window was open, the challenge was to close it back up with a monolithic piece of glass, laminated, adhered to the exterior of the wall so that there would be no evidence of its anchorage. The final work involved hiding our tracks, backing out, leaving no trace, and perhaps most importantly, recreating the exact layering and the leveling of the dirt up against the exterior of the glass, which you'll see right there. There it is. We swept just before we were done. So in the finished piece, here's a view of the whole. So the Gordon Matta Clark is on the left, and our piece is at the end of the gallery with a window. If anybody knows their Gordon Matta Clark, there's a dumpster in the window. That's a reference to Gordon Matta Clark's dumpster piece. It all kind of lined up for us. We didn't even put that there. It was just there. But the point is that there's even a little inscription on the floor where the floor is a different color, and that recreates the third dimension. So it feels like a space that's completely inscribed into the space. It's a subspace, as it were. The wall, the window is a little uncanny. It's hard to believe, and that is what the point was, and that was fun. The wall still leaks. Water still comes through it. It's an active piece of architecture. Okay, next project. These are setups, really, for the one that we're going to talk about. So we were invited to do a little coffee shop next to some big architecture. So we call this High Octane because it's next to the High Museum of Art, the Woodruff Art Center. This, of course, we know is the High Museum of Art. This is Renzo Piano's building workshop addition to the High, creating the quad in 2005. And in both cases, I want you to look at this little red dot right here. Right, that's our project. Okay, here we go. This is Renzo Piano, right? This is High Museum. That's our project. We were just messing around. But the space we got was unbelievably small. They came to us, they said, we have a little, it's like a little place that used to be a box office, boarded up, we don't know what to do with it. Can you make it a coffee shop? And there it is, this little sliver. I forget the dimensions. It's like 7 feet across down there and 9 feet across or 10 up here. 11, okay, it's tiny. There it is in the beginning. 17 feet tall, told you the dimension. Here's a plan. And our approach was, okay, we've got a very narrow space. It's 17 feet tall. Let's make the problem twice as bad. Let's make it 34 feet tall and try to widen the space. And the way we did that was by doubling the perception of the space. So we mirrored the ceiling, we mirrored the walls, and we came up with this idea that when you were inside, you felt like you were surrounded by the outside. It was a 360-degree perception in an exceptionally narrow space. That's the idea. So it's a moment of questioning. Where are you? How big is this? How big does it feel by comparison? So the O in the ceiling is a half an O. The completion of the O is for Octane Coffee. The detail, it's not a complex project. We inset these felt-lined booths for privacy into the mirrored alcove. And you can see the reflection of the High campus in the window. So there's a sense of immersion, even though there's also a sense of privacy and kind of intimacy, a small-scale thing. Questioning the boundary of that space. The primary project in this category is one which got mentioned, which is a new makerspace for the Georgia Institute of Technology and the Board of Regents. Those are our clients. This is built in 1959, if I'm recalling. This is what it was until recently. It was an auditorium for the much larger Van Leer building. And I would say everybody should work on a round building once in their life and then never do it again, because it nearly broke us. But through adversity comes, discovery. And what we discovered were all kinds of weird things about this round space. First of all, it's obviously it's completely round. It's got an overlapping geometry, one circle inscribed for the perimeter, another circle inscribed slightly off center for the structure, no windows, sloping floor, unbelievably terrible acoustics. Our charge was to take this volume, both on the basement, which was filled with mechanical equipment, and this one single auditorium space with a sloping floor. Our charge was to take it from this. This was renovated. It wasn't quite this in 1959. This was later, but you get the sense of the space.
89.
1959 was when it was built. It wasn't like this in 1959. It had been renovated, but you get the sense of the space. And our charge was to turn it into this, a maker space, a laboratory, messy, full of stuff, flat floors, active, anything but a windowless round building. Our strategy was to, which is kind of, you can start to sense a pattern here, is to cut away at the building and remove before we add anything. So on the ground floor, so north is to the left, School of Architecture is up here, Clough Commons is over here. We've inscribed this massive cut through the foundation wall and a new entrance and a new stair, just to scoop you up off of Tech Green and bring you right into this mix of the lower floor. Took all the mechanical equipment out of the lower floor. And then this was the real challenge. We were asked to put 50% more square footage in the building than currently existed. So it was a 10,000 square foot building, and we were asked to make it 15,000 square feet and not increase the perimeter. Board of Regents said, don't extend outside the perimeter. Georgia Tech said, add 5,000 more square feet. So we came up with this approach, which had been studied, but we came up with a kind of a different way, which is to suspend a new third floor off of the existing columns. There are 10 concrete columns. And instead of filling the middle, we worked around the perimeter to create this theater. And the entire structure is supported off of the existing columns, spanning, I think it's 60 feet across the length of the room. So we have some very large steel beams that were brought in. When we figured out how to make windows, we realized the only way to make windows in a round building that has any kind of integrity is just to strike a line, a chord as it is in geometry, and lop off a bit of the circle to expose it. That was our strategy for windows. So here's a view of the new structure that was threaded in. It's like a ship in the bottle. This is the overall accumulation of geometry after the completion of the design. And I'll show you a few pictures of where we started and where we are. This was existing. We had this background idea of redaction. And we know what redaction is, right? You're striking out words in sensitive documents. So we thought, if we're going to remove, let's remove to reveal what's inside rather than cover up. So we're uncovering as an act of architecture. So we struck all these black lines as kind of a figure, and those are what's being built. So we're carving into the exterior to expose it. And I think this picture on the right is probably one of our favorites. This lets you understand the rawness of exposure that you feel inside of this drum, up, down, sideways, by creating these cuts. So this is a view down below in the mechanical room, former mechanical room, and then looking up after cutting through this sloping concrete slab. There's Clough Commons over there. So you now have a 3-story view. This is a view of the lobby as we were rendering it during various design phases. This is existing. We call this the Cranky Stair. It's an angry stair. It comes down and it runs up against the perimeter where we've cut in a new window, and then is forced to course correct and spill into the lobby. And it's really, we're embracing the collision of geometries. Upper floor after the removals. Where Brian is standing here is actually an exterior balcony. So we've sucked in exterior space and pulled it inside of the building so you can stand there and look over Tech Green. And then working up, this is a panoramic view taken a few weeks ago, where you get an overall sense of immersion with the context. Just a note, kind of a parallel technical note to Caddell is all of our projects have very clear sustainability strategies, sometimes from the owner, sometimes our own. And when you open up windows in a building, especially a round building, you have to deal with the solar gain. And so this is just a little study of our luminance daylight studies about how much solar gain and also glare we would be getting once you create skylights and windows in this space. And this is a really fun aspect. We originally worked with a firm Pattern R&D to do this work, and then we kind of continued on our own. We really studied how glare could be taken from a difficult issue to one that's acceptable while still having the window openings that we desired. So we came up with this zigzag screen, it's perforated. It would be the same color as the brick, the same shape as the drum, but kind of spread across like an accordion in front of the new windows. That's Leland. Hey, Leland. Looking good. This is our technical drawing. And then just a couple of views of this as a recent mock-up of this. It's aluminum. It's very light gauge. It's about 1/16 of an inch thick, but it's bent for strength, and it goes across these large openings. So that's what's coming on board for Van Leer, which we're really excited to share with you soon.
So we're on to vectors. To us, a vector is a fascinating thing. In geometry, a vector guides the position of elements. A single line, an axis connecting 2 points or more points. It can also be a series of lines in a linked continuum, which can take almost any shape. As a boundary, creating sides, a vector participates elastically, dialectically with the space it contains. And as a concept, a vector embodies a direct way to create a relationship between distant things with the power to bring them into dialogue with one another. A vector can fluidly mutate between a physical element and a projected extension, such as an axis, again, in a building that extends into the landscape or into the city with reciprocal implications, meaning that you may not know which is the beginning and which is the end, and that relationship is reversible. So these next few projects share the idea of vector. And we'll start by looking at this project for the renovation of the Atlanta Contemporary Arts Center. Now, it's related to the boundary issues project David showed. This is the window now currently that we initially opened up with that other project. But as we knew the space initially, it was a very confused space, uncoordinated in its presentation of the gallery spaces beyond to the visitor, and this photograph is taken right inside the front door. What we did, the simple gesture of the project, was to pull a line generated from this acute angle through the interior of the space and bring that all the way down to the entry lobby, so that your eye is drawn into the gallery space, and then it wraps around and you're presented with the other end of that line also. And in the new space along the way, we would add a new lecture hall, very important part of their mission, educational mission of the institution. So this is then the view after renovation upon entering, and you see how this wall is carrying you through. We have a large opening into the lecture hall, but this very thin header is allowing for that continuity of that line. And then moving into the kind of a fore gallery to the main gallery, you see how this line goes all the way to the exterior wall, it bounces, it continues very high and then drops down low again. Here it is dropping down low and coming back to, we're looking back now to the initial entry lobby space. And then back to this previous photograph, you see how that wall then becomes independent, and we left it free from the exterior on this end with a small gap between the two so that you could read it both as independent, and also you could understand it's making the space of the galleries. So for this project, it's very simple, but it allows us to contain the space and create a very simple sense of arrival into this primary gallery space. This next project uses vectors in a slightly different way. It's an interior project for Bloomberg. It's on the 26th floor of the 1180 Peachtree building at 14th and Peachtree. And here vectors are, this is a view from the public corridor and entering into Bloomberg space. And what we really were trying to do is take lines that were initially ascribed to wall surfaces and casework, and then pull those lines into the soffits, initially into soffits, and then into this cloud of ceiling baffles beyond. So the line transforms over the course of its kind of inscription in the project. And here it ends up surrounding an interior space that is exposing the raw concrete of the construction. Here are the lower soffits, and then here's the driving geometry of the ceiling baffles and surrounding this exposed concrete center to the project. Now these lines, very importantly, go right through these other two walls. And these walls of glass are meant to enclose acoustically these spaces, but there's also the desire for visual connection between conference rooms, teaching, training room, and the primary workspace. And the continuity of the geometry through these vectors is what gives us that transformation. And it increases the transparency of the glass, we would say. So the glass header is kind of gets confused in this cloud structure that just penetrates the walls. And you will see some people you might recognize in these photographs who are models for this photo shoot. We appreciate that.
We put out a call for models, but the response was limited. So.
Adriana and Emily
Yeah.
rose to the challenge, so thank you. So then looking back from the training room to the News Bureau work desk, you see it kind of through the ceiling and that geometry, you lose the distinction of the separation that the glass wall is giving you. And in this case, you see where there's this transition between the baffled ceiling and the lower soffit that slices this room into kind of indifferent to the planning on the floor. So there's the difference between the organization of the floor and the organization of the ceiling allows for a really loose sense of boundary regarding rooms, I would say. See that line and these lines are not conforming. So this last project in this category uses vectors in yet another way. And here they're more closely ascribed to circulation and to paths rather than objects or walls. This is a competition we entered. It's an open competition. There were over 400 entries, so it's highly likely that many of you are familiar with this, with the project. But it's for an addition to this historic museum in Lima, Peru. And it is for Contemporary Art Wing edition, and the site for it is in this corner right here. And this museum is part of a large park, and so with this new addition is also envisioned a new entry, public entry into that park. And there were several very interesting constraints to this project. One is that it had to remain, for the most part, inside the park and therefore not accessible at night. And another is that because the new addition could not touch the historic building, had to remain separated, and nor could it block the view of that historic building other than framing it, it was envisioned as to be entirely below ground. And lastly, the city, as a simultaneous project, was building the largest metro station on that intersection simultaneous to this museum project. So here's the intersection. Here's the site that we were given that is separated from the historic building and its relationship to the park. And as we were thinking about this problem of a museum below ground, obvious precedents came to mind, Mies in Berlin, where the heavy roof is lifted up and the glass walls allow light to come in to the primary initial floor space and also below. And then, of course, IMP at the Louvre Museum, where he's creating these large punctures in the floor and allowing light and the museum goers to enter into the project. So the site plan, again, this red box is our site. It was driven by several vectors, and I'll just point out, a primary one here was to connect as a shortcut across the site, this sidewalk with what looks like the front of the museum. I should say that historically that was the front of the museum. This is now entirely closed off, and the front of the museum, historic museum, is from the park only. So our idea was to take this vector, draw a new line here, and try and make all of this triangle of the corner of the a plaza that was open 24 hours, never closed off from the park. And that passersby would have to go through the museum even if they were just getting from point A to point B. Of course, this is the entry to the metro here. Then the second vector would be straight from that plaza to the heart of the park, or the central piece of the park. So that is an axis that cuts through this element. And then the third would be from a bus drop-off where many people were coming right into along here. And looking closer, you can see these vectors, but you also see the area in pink are the only floors that are on grade with the plaza. The rest of this project is all open to below. We're looking deep into gallery and other program areas. And coming into the lobby, you initially come down, you get on this other kind of lineament or vector down a primary set of stairs to a main lobby that's halfway into the depth of the earth. From there, you go to library, classroom components, or start your path down 2 sets of ramps. And these ramps are vectors that bounce around inside the excavated space. You arrive at the bottom, you can mill around the galleries, and you can go up the ramp that you didn't come down to extend your course through the museum. And in section, what this looks like is your arrival is here, you come down the flight of stairs, and then you have a choice of coming down one ramp and going up the other, or vice versa, to create a change of view and vantage with the art. So the gallery really starts at the top of this ramp system, and the ramp carries you by artworks as well as the pool of space below. And you're below the passages. This is the sidewalk above you that cuts through the gallery with views down on other sides. And of course then these heavy roof plates that are tilted and sloped, but they are raised to the level of the historic museum so that you get vantages through the glass, framing that museum, obscuring it, so it's a little push and pull with how it's shown, but we think this is ambitious in its presentation of contemporary art relative to the historic. And then as other parts of the expression had to do with how things like fire stairs and elevators that had to come up to that main level would emerge and become solid blocks. Like this is a fire stair coming up, but would stop way short of the roof so that you still get views over and around these blocks. And this is the view from the park, down the primary vector taking you to the city plaza. So this is not a project about the roofs as much as it is about the volumes and lifting them up high so that you get light down deep into the galleries below.
Okay, so last couple things here. Rooms. we're less and less interested, even if you might see the last project, we're less and less interested in buildings as objects that are static or as figures that you might say are wonderful play in light and shadow. We're, smooth parametric surfaces and the like. We are more and more fascinated with rooms that are not rooms, places that are frames of perception, scaffolds for life, collections of materials, observations, and actions that might be fleeting, variable, maybe vulnerable, and surprising. For those of you who've had a chance to visit us in our office, this is a study in a few rooms. I won't explain the project in entirety, but there's a room out front which has no walls but a canopy. There's a courtyard which has 4 walls, no windows in the walls, but no roof. And finally, the studio, which has no windows but has doors to the right, back to that courtyard and skylights. So the view out is entirely back to the courtyard that you just passed through. It's a sequence of rooms. And those rooms become frames which frame other things. To the left is our sign announcing our firm to the world. You wonder why we wait around for new clients. But to the right is a different kind of frame of the existing situation of materiality and acceptance, decay, and so on. That's all good. Two examples of ideas about rooms. We were invited to do a new addition to the Steelcase furniture company campus in Michigan. It's a very large campus, but this is the corner over there to the right, where we were asked to consider. Steelcase has been around a long time, and have done a lot of different kinds of furniture. And this is a kind of an elemental or approach that came about in the 50s and the 60s, where you have these free-standing stations in an open plan place. Well, that's very similar to some of the systems they have now, which are freestanding objects in an open space. Likewise, Steelcase is known worldwide for their invention of cubicles and of privacy within larger spaces and subdivision of space. This is from the 60s, and this is from the present day. We have the same issues with privacy and small scale and large scale at this company, which is extremely innovative. They tackle this. But what we discovered is that no matter what you put in the room, you have a fundamental problem with the room itself. This is a pretty amazing room. You've got this ceiling of fluorescent and no windows, maybe at the very end. And that was the problem for us. That's where we really concentrated. This is the campus. What's in red is where our study was. I'm just going to go through a whole series of programmatic studies. They gave us no room names. They didn't say conference room offices. They said states of flow and transaction and surprise and delight. That was our program. So we had to come up with this way of making these weird bubbles of privacy and flow and then moving them around on the site like soap bubbles. And so we did that, and we did this over and over and over again, and started to come up with this idea where maybe there's 50% of the building should be these flow bubbles, and the rest should be outdoors. Maybe the problem of the room for furniture is the room itself, and we're not thinking about porosity enough. We thought about this at the individual level of the workstation, of the cube, and so on. And we said, for every area that where you work, there's an outdoor area next to it. What if? And so we started multiplying that. It's like a virus. More and more courtyards over and over again, but adjacent to every private space. So you would always feel like you're in the larger environment, even while you're in the internal environment. So we came up with this crazy plan, which is half courtyards, half rooms. Not rooms, we weren't allowed to say that. Half activities. But what we did is we built off the existing rotated geometry of the building, and we just kind of tugged it and pulled it out into the landscape. And it's like, it's a sponge approach, porosity. And this is the type of interior spaces we were looking at. Now this last image is important because it's less about the form as it is about the ability to see through it, and that is equally lit on the interior and the exterior. And we know that's not true. Glass doesn't allow that. But that's what we were thinking about. And if you could get enough light to do that, and you could create a porous building. Lastly, just this past summer, we were part of a team for the new campus center here on campus. And we took this type of thinking about activity and room and interaction and implemented it into our entry into this. It was 3 teams were shortlisted for this design competition for the new campus center. And we were one of them, and it was a 3-month process. And we love this image because this is not the existing campus center. This is Boggs Chemistry Hall, but it's right next door. And it's indicative of a type of approach towards campus architecture that existed on this campus and is still evident. These windowless buildings. Now, this is the campus center. This is taken in 1971. But there it is, muscular, enclosed. It's like a bunker in the landscape. You won't even recognize this. This is where Hemp Hill Avenue used to go through right in front of it. This is the plan, and you can see why we have the building we have. This is a rabbit warren full of rooms in a perimeter that has very few windows and 4 equally spaced fire stairs. So our approach was, wait a minute, how can we take the program and, like we did in Steelcase, stop thinking about rooms? I'm going to go back again and do this. Stop thinking about rooms, if I can get there, and start thinking about activities. And if we can think about activities, then we're a much more translucent, transparent, gradient set of things, not a collection of rooms. So we're going to show you 2 approaches that we developed over this 3-month period. These were the constraints we had to deal with. We're always confronting constraints. Utilities, existing buildings, don't build over here, you can build here, and this is where we were allowed to build. So we said, okay, we figured that out, now we have to stay within the boundaries. And one approach, well, wait a minute, before I talk about that, the sustainability overlay was paramount to this. And in both approaches, we were envisioning a building that did not go always into a fully protected and enclosed, but tried to push the boundary towards something that's essentially an outdoors or partially outdoors type of environment. One which had high controllability to very low controllability and porosity. This is where we were pushing the design, independent of form. We set up a whole zoning system for sustainability of outdoor areas, semi-conditioned, fully conditioned. It's a very exciting way to think about design before design for us. Our team was huge. We had 10 consultants, about 40 people. This is our studio that you saw earlier. This is this large pinup wall where we had all these different schemes, and this is Georgia Tech visiting us. They run these competitions where you work for a couple months and then they visit you all in one day, and they watch you work as part of the competition, and they ask no questions. They just watch you work. And so that's what we did. We just worked, and this is all Georgia Tech watching us work. It was great. It was a lot of pressure. It was strange, but it really kept us going. And then they left, and we got some written feedback. But the point is that this was a collaborative effort, even amongst our peers and our team members, but also with Georgia Tech very much. So the 2 schemes we're going to show you, I'm just going to go through a series of things we came up with before we even started these schemes. These were variations, long bars, porous bars, clusters, and so on. One scheme that we really, really liked was this one, where we said, you know what, we're going to keep this porosity but make a vertical commons. And we call this the circulation commons approach. This is a site plan. So just to orient you, this is Tech Green. Van Leer is over here. I have it? Yeah, there's Van Leer. There's the round building, right? This is you can hardly see it. This is the existing campus center and First Center and parking garage. And the key to this approach was everything that you see in yellow here. This is a diagrammatic model we made. Everything in yellow was this commons. And it was one that was stretched around an internal courtyard that spiraled from the ground up, and it embraced this key cross circulation from east to west. So it was both in section and in plan. Everything in blue represented all these different activities that are kind of floating in this mass of form. This is some floor plans. And you can see how we've taken the existing, you can barely see, you see the structural grid? That's the existing campus center. And we very aggressively almost cut right through the middle of it and taken what was a barrier and turned it into this large vertical portal and split the building in half. And that was to create a sense of commons. And you get this idea in the section where the circulation is floating between these building masses. This is a view. This is taken from, or positioned from Tech Green, walking to the west, approaching Campus Center. And so we've literally pulled the building apart and pulled it up, almost like suspended from above. And you see that pink stair there. This is that circulation commons, which is intentionally is bright and interactive and is at odds with the existing geometry so as to create an active space making and flow. This is, you can see that type of activity next to the campanile. If you think about the diagram that I showed, the second scheme that we developed, instead of formally congesting and lifting it vertically, spread out this transparency of functions in the landscape. So we were really pushing ourselves to try to develop different ideas. This was an ideas competition. Georgia Tech campus, the series of objects in the landscape. And this approach said, let's take that object-based approach and build a center which is decentralized. It's a collection of things, not a single thing itself. It's an early model. Early sketches. We've broken this apart and intentionally, in this version, intentionally have these diagonals of circulation. We do a lot of hand drawing in studio. I tell my students who I'm working with that when you're stuck, get off the computer, draw with your hand. Go back to the computer, and vice versa. And we do this. We have high tables and low tables. We have computers and we have stand-up. And these are the kind of drawings that we would do at 1 to 32nd inch equals a foot, 30 by 40 by hand to work through these problems and iterate. The actual plan rectified. It became, it was not about the geometry decided, it was about the environs and the placemaking. And I'll just go back, as the program steps up the hill over 35 feet of gain, you get into this courtyard commons of these various scaled little buildings and micro places that are all circulating around these common space. And this is the central courtyard. So it's intentionally activating the landscape without being a singular building in any way. Overhead is a unifying element, and that is a canopy. So this is a programmatic model. We worked in terms of activities as well as form at the same time. And this is an overall model. So you get the sense of everything that's blue is floating in these kind of forms of white. Conference rooms and so on is 300,000 square feet with a $100 million budget. So 300,000 square feet of program was the challenge. It was quite large. But what we realized is that we could both be playful in the landscape, but we could also unify with this single line, this datum, which is a canopy, which comes and goes, and it reminds you that you're at the center, even though you're not in the middle and indoors. So if this is what was existing and what we still have, this is a view of what was proposed in this scheme. Large ballroom on the left and a delaminated student center on the right. It's reclad. The glass would be colored relative to the program therein. We intentionally wanted a very vibrant place. We intentionally wanted to blur interior and exterior and group versus individual in this vision.
So just in closing, I'm going to read this a little bit. But we've come to the realization that almost nothing we do is really new. There is no new. We have almost everything at hand already. There can be the rearrangement of material and light. Our interest is to reframe the world as unexpected and unfamiliar. Much of it is there already, and we are just trying to see it clearer and to augment it. Much of it, to remind ourselves of this, we came across this quote from Mondrian, classic modernist from last century, saying the culture of particular form is approaching its end. The culture of determined relationships has begun. We are rearranging embodied energy to see and live in the world in a new way for a little while. It's about relationships, relationships, relationships. Thank you.
So does anybody have any questions? So before people start leaving, just a reminder that there's an exhibition opening right after this upstairs with Leer Interdisciplinary entry into the Venice Biennale last year. So after this discussion, we can go upstairs and have some food and look at the exhibition. Yes.
Beautiful work. Thank you. That was really, really nice. And I understood every word you said. That's amazing. Do you all intend to stay small? What are your thoughts as your firm goes through the next 20 years?
We accept all offers of growing. The scale is not the problem for us. It's finding the right clients that want to create this thing together, that is worthy and has kind of presence in the world. So it's not about size. We'd love to. This project for the campus center was totally exciting for us. We scaled thinking, and we scaled our team and our production and our network. We spent way too much money on it, but that's what happens. And we have no problem about thinking larger. I think you can hit a wall where you're not involved with the work. We're not there yet.
But did you mean size of firm or size of project?
I meant size of firm.
Yeah.
Because I'm really kind of surprised that you're still 5 people. You're doing such beautiful work. But it may be that sign out in front of your office down.
Well, I think we want to get to a size where we can do more projects simultaneously. Mm-hmm. But that's probably not a large number of projects simultaneously. Right now, we often feel kind of we're under-subscribed in terms of quantity of projects. Maybe that affords us the ability to elaborate or even over-elaborate some of the work. But yeah, I think we want to grow in both regards, but probably not to Perkins and Will scale.
I love Perkins and Will, but that's, yeah, we're not.
Nothing against Perkins and Will, by the way.
Size only, yeah. Well, I wouldn't abandon the circle. Well, to your first point about acoustics, when we unveiled everything, you stand in the middle of the dome and you clap your hands, it's deafening, the amount of reverberation. It sounds like a gunshot. So the circular building couldn't be worse. But it's being remedied. I mean, the whole underside of the dome of that space has an acoustical treatment that is absorbing most of the acoustic energy. But we've really enjoyed working with the circle, because what we discovered are things like when you approach the wall, the perimeter of a circle, and you stand in front of a window, you have this panoramic view that you never have with a flat wall. And you would think you'd know that, but it's not until you get out past the line of glazing and you realize you're right up against this curving form that the whole landscape unfolds in front of you. It's like a projection screen for, super wide movie that's curved. Like a 3D movie. So that has been really powerful, and I think that will inform us. So.
Has the evolution of your
Now I understand. Has the evolution of the field of architecture been in parallel with the evolution of our own firm? Is that the gist of it? Well, to some degrees, yes. I mean, we're now drawing in Revit and modeling in Revit. And we certainly are interested in the world around us. I mean, the architectural world, beyond Atlanta, beyond the United States, right? It all comes to bear on us. And we want to be part of that conversation. I think it's important that you strive to be part of the conversation, beyond your own sandbox. But in other ways, you know, you challenge, maybe this internal dialogue where, oh, are we stuck in the mud? Are we not moving fast enough relative to our peers? And what's the impetus of that change? I think it's, I don't have a clear answer, but I think that's part of our conversation in our office. Yeah.
And I think we realize that all architecture is local, you know.
Yeah, that's true.
If we're not figuring it out, you know, it doesn't matter what we're interested in or our ambitions are unless we're really figuring it out for the project. And that's where we spend most of our time, just trying to figure it out.
This presented, which was really wonderful and insightful, was a building of your firm by showing the different segments of work in building something.
Mm-hmm.
So like I would imagine like in the beginning of your firm, you didn't have all of these tools at your disposal because you hadn't had the interactions yet. And at the same time, like we as a city at least have been like building up and up and up.
Mm-hmm.
And you all are taking away and spreading out and bringing in more nature.
Mm.
The other thing, though, I would just to build on that I would say that is unique about what you guys are doing, I think you're starting to establish a reputation around this, is that you're becoming, and you're very skillful at repurposing buildings as opposed to tearing them down and starting from scratch. And I think that's an interesting trend. It seems like in Atlanta that, you know, an attitude of just tear it down, start from scratch maybe was an old model, but now there's much more kind of preserving of some trace or some history and then trying to intervene. And you got almost all your projects.
Almost everyone.
Yeah, and I think that's something that's pretty interesting. And I can imagine from a client's perspective that it's very unique that you really know how to do that. Because it's a lot easier to do a new building than it is to repurpose an old building.
Yeah, it's inverted for us.
Yeah. No, I think
Like we're in comfortable territory. The thing about working with existing things is invariably it's the context of what's there that gives us the grist for something new. And we really thrive on finding the story and then tearing it apart and rearranging it. And so even if we were to do more new work, ground up, no existing conditions or anything, we still are embedded in that anchoring of almost storytelling with stuff as opposed to starting from scratch an external idea. We have little patience for imposed ideas. It has to be generated out of the place and the stuff.
Notice that a lot of the interventions act kind of like contrastingly or kind of in contrary to pre-existing structures. And I was wondering if you guys ever considered what interventions might be like in your own structure.
We've actually had that happen. We had we did an addition to a house. It's on our website. You can see it. It's Hooker Fox residence. We did an addition to a house. It's a little tiny bungalow, and we did this addition which floats out over the back. It's like this huge boulder on the house, and it's lifted up because for zoning reasons we couldn't put all the square footage on the floors. On the ground, so we had to put some underground in the basement and some up high. And then the owners, who were dear friends of ours, said, you know, we now want to go and renovate the existing house. And they said, but we just want to do it. We want to work with you again, but we're going to use a different architect. I said, okay, that's fine. So they hired another architect, and they renovated the whole front, and they came back to us with the renderings. They said, here's the design for the renovation of the front half of your project. What do you think before we build it? And it was just, it was unbelievable, right, for us, because it's your own thing, and it was got quoting the back and doing more on the front. And inevitably, the project went along, and it was much tempered. But we are at the point where we're seeing our work tampered with. And it can be both unsettling, but also it's a release. It can be delightful.
You let it
I
happen.
let it go. Because we came in and messed around with someone else's stuff and did something. And I think that's something we're coming to terms with too, which is that we're part of a much larger project. We do our thing and we back off and we get out of the way. That's what we think about stuff.
Adriana.
I think most of us here have had as a professor, and I've always been curious, how does academia inform your profession? How does your profession inform academia?
David, take it away.
I just turn to Brian, I say, well, the reason why we teach is because we remain challenged. I don't think anybody who is a student realizes how exhausting it is to teach. It's just absolutely exhausting because you trying to get in the project of every single person you're working with. And so it's like running a little 5K every time you come to studio. And you get out and you're like, oh my God, 14 projects, desk crits, you know. But that is the reason why we do it, because it just keeps pushing us out of our comfort zone. And I think also, well, because we just appreciate fresh viewpoints. And we also appreciate the collegiality in people who we work with, our peers, our cohort and the faculty, but also people who come in and kind of land in our school and give this amazing lecture, and then, you know, like, oh my gosh, that's incredible, we'll never be like that, you know. So it's really being in the mix. And so that's what keeps us fresh in our practice. And then there's the vice versa, I suppose.
It's kind of being uncomfortable, or being comfortable outside of your comfort zone.
Yeah.
We know it's critical to kind of a vitality. We hope in our work, but just in life, right? Like, I can't imagine just being. It's like why you go to lectures, why you see movies, you know, why you go to art galleries. It's the same kind of reason.
Amy?
Sorry, back here first. Were you, I missed I couldn't quite hear what you said, but were you referring to a specific project? Or? Yeah. It's part of keeping focus on the program. You never lose focus. You can't. You lose your client if you lose focus of their program. It's not our program, right? So it's the rendering of that programming, the kind of that, you just can't lose sight of it, and we don't.
That's the thing to keep in mind. These are as much not our projects. Anybody will tell you that. These are not our projects as much as they're people we're working with, the clients. So,
but I will say that
yeah.
some of these relationships do allow you to go back to the client and say, what if this was like that, and this wasn't what you thought it was going to be, but it was more of a blurred relationship. That's a fluid conversation. That's why a good client is so important, right? And nurturing that relationship, because you're not going to get extraordinary results if you're just satisfying the program within a structural grid, and it's the efficiencies or economies of the project driving things, right? So.
both did your own houses in the last few years. How'd that work out? I thought it worked out pretty good.
Oh,
You're living it.
we haven't shown them.
Oh, well, to varying degrees, it's not, I would say it's a different type of project.
First of all, Terry, I want to thank you for being present at all of these lectures and being such a supporter. You are a bright light in the art and architecture community. And I've seen you drive by my house. And I have seen you take a picture, and I welcome it. So the question is coming from a really good place. I'll answer first. I mean, a house is a very personal thing, you know. It's not done yet.
That's why I drive by.
Yeah. Well, I did a weird thing where I tried to GC it myself too, which nearly killed me. You know, it's funny. You do something for yourself and it becomes very, I mean, my house it's all about my family, you know. It's very personal. They're the client. But I'm trying to work through some things that we don't work through at the office. And it's been great. I love it. I will never live in something that's not at least some kind of investigation. But it's a burden too. Brian?
I don't know how much I have to add to that.
Brian's house is much nicer than my house. I love his house.
Thank you, Dan. Can't really disagree.
Just about. Brian's house was a disaster.
Yes.
It
Yes.
was modified so many times, and it looked horrible. And it had some funky places that were interesting inside, I thought. And anyway, I got a peek inside, and it looks superb from the street. And a great room that kind of curves around where you probably do everything. I've still got that in my head. It's a place I'd want to hang in.
Appreciate that. I think the only thing I would add is that the level of angst when it's your own project is even higher. It just ratchets things up a little bit.
Okay, maybe one last question.
Thanks for the presentation. You guys passed off seamlessly through projects, and I was wondering about how you two work together since you've been in the same practice for several years, and especially as you expand and contract, how you both stay equal partners on projects.
Brian just does what I tell him to do. No, not at all.
It's so easy that way. Well, we've known each other now for 25 years. We have a really fluid conversation back and forth. We know how to bicker. We know how to get on each other's nerves, but not let it affect us, right? But in terms of the project, we each want to be part of every project, right? So we don't really turn one project to one person, one to the other. We stay actively involved, especially early on, and then as projects move into later phases, one does take the lead, and the other one is just kind of more consulting. That's the pragmatics of the process, really. But and I think with others in our office, we hope it's not just our voices present and involved, and that's very much how we were. How we came into the profession was in an office, Mac and Merrill's office. We were part of teams that you felt your role was really important. So you felt that way, and it worked out that way. So
I think it's also trust, to be quite frank about it, you know. Sometimes you have to trust that what you're thinking is just not right. And, you know, you take a turn. You say, yeah, that's just not working out. You know, you're right again. That, you know, we do that. You know, but it's just we have our own predilections and tendencies, but I think we do push at each other to say, get out of that. You know, do something else.
All right, great.
Thanks.
So join us upstairs for the exhibition opening, and you guys, thanks. Great.
Thank you.